Hi everyone. My name is Imraan Valodia. I'm going to be chairing this evening session. I'd like to welcome you all to the conversation with the Minister of Finance, Minister Enoch Godongwana. Thank you so much, Minister, for making the time to chat with us today. I do realize that you must have had a kind of pretty hectic day, so we're really, really grateful for the time that you that you've agreed to give us that you've agreed to give us today. So just for the audience, the way that we're going to the way that we're going to work the evening is that this is kind of really a kind of opportunity for you to kind of have access to the minister, and a kind of opportunity as well for you to put some questions to him. The way we're going to do that is that we'll kind of use the Q&A session, kind of at least the Q&A function in Zoom to kind of transmit kind of questions to the minister. Our team at Wits will work through that Q&A function and send questions to me, which I'll then put to the minister. I think you'll all accept that we might not get through all of the questions, so we kind of really encourage you to be brief and to the point. We'd also like to appeal to you to kind of use social media to kind of share your thoughts, and Tolawana, who's handling some of that behind the scenes, will put up on the chat the kind of Twitter handle that she'd like you to use. So, Minister, just to get us going, I've kind of prepared a few questions, and I'd like to get us going with a question about the more long-term issues. It does seem to me that if we can get South Africa onto a kind of growth path where we're having kind of growth rates that are much higher than the rates that we have at present, that sort of really solves many of the problems that you've kind of grappled with in this budget. So if we're growing at about 3 or 3.5%, the fiscus would have much higher tax revenues. We would have much kind of greater employment. The kind of requirement on government to support to kind of support the social wage elements that you mentioned in your speech would be reduced, and that we'd sort of get the economy onto a path which is a lot more sustainable, and which makes the kind of problems that you're having to deal with a lot easier. The kind of critical question then is, how do we get the economy onto that path where we're going to generate employment, kind of increase the growth rate, etc.? Kind of in your view, how does this budget of yesterday help us onto that path? And if you could talk to us about how this budget contributes towards getting us onto that longer term growth path? And what, in your view, is government's strategy to get us onto that growth path? So I'll kind of end the question there and pass it on to you, Minister.
Thank you. That's correctly so. The challenge is, how do we make sure that we can grow the economy and get more revenues? A case in point is the commodity boom, which has helped us. So if we had growth, I mean, the commodity boom has been able to give us 182 billion, which gave us space to implement SRD, gave us space to provide tax relief and so on. So growth is quite critical, I agree with that. The devil is in the detail. Is what exactly do you then, what are these growth drivers that you need to achieve? That's a difficult debate. Sometimes it's take an ideological one, angle. You know, we've been concentrating largely in South Africa, the debate on macroeconomic problems, monetary policy, and so on. The Ricardo Asman and them have just said we're barking at the wrong tree. In their recent paper, they said our challenge is not macroeconomic, it's micro reforms. Now, I tend to at least agree with that. I tend to at least agree with that. For instance, we've had now for 13 years, electricity constraints. Right? We've been government has been trying to fix Eskom than to fix the electricity supply. That's my argument. So what we need, we're beginning to embark on what is called transforming the network industries in such a manner that we can be able to agile and be able to assist the growth. And in particular, electricity is one of them. So there's part of what is called structural reforms, which we're undertaking to do that. It may not be the only answer. Somebody asked me this morning, because in addition to what I've said in addition to that, I've made reference to what is called expanding the reform agenda. Right? Expanding the reform agenda is just making government make things easy. In line with what the president was saying, for instance, if you apply for a rezoning a license in one municipality, it take 2 years. In another municipality, it take 80 days. So clearly, it's to make government agile. And the other issues in infrastructure, what we're talking about in the environment, the infrastructure itself has got to be brought in and make sure that it can facilitate growth. It can stimulate demand, but over time, it provides a modern economy. The fact that we don't have cheap data because we've not allocated straight spectrum is also a constraint. So I'm saying part of that is that infrastructure problem. There's a notion that more small business have got the capacity to employ more people. And part of that, that's why we're testing with this bounce back guarantee to look at that. But we don't have all the answers. It's quite important that, we're discussing with you guys that have got to help us think this is true. But it's an important aspect of our debate. How do we make sure that happens? We grow this economy, but we're focusing at this moment in some of the structural reforms and making sure that the economy, infrastructure, small business, tax reform, we provided tax relief both to taxpayers and companies in order to support growth.
So if I can push that one a little more, just to link the budget to the growth issue and the microeconomic reforms that you mentioned, the kind of skeptic in me would say, Minister, you had the kind of opportunity, perhaps, with the boom in the tax collections that came out of the kind of overruns from the commodity boom, to place the economy on a different kind of trajectory of growth. But if I look at the kind of growth numbers in the budget over the kind of 3-year time horizon, I see growth rates of 2.1 for 2022, and then coming down to 1.8 for the next 2 years. Those are not the sort of growth rates that I think are going to put us onto this growth trajectory, which I think would solve lots of the questions on debt, on kind of employment, etc. What is your sense then of the potential growth rates that we can see? I mean, I kind of realize that in the budget documentation, you've got to put growth rates that the market would think are kind of realistic. But that seems to me like a kind of pretty pessimistic scenario for what the potential of these reforms might be. So could you kind of elaborate a little more, as we've got a question from Prof Uma, who's the kind of head of the School of Economics and Finance, and she's asking what exactly are these kind of structural reforms, and kind of how's that going to nudge up the kind of growth rates towards a 3.5% growth rate?
I mean, there are two assumptions which underpin Treasury's economic focus. By themselves, they may be limiting. The first assumption is an assumption that says, if everything remains the same, as things are, everything remains the same, this is the growth focus we're likely to achieve. But it places them in a comfortable zone, in the sense that that takes me to the second assumption. The second assumption, if that's the growth rate we're projecting, what revenue are we likely to generate? So the assumptions are for two reasons: to say things are not changing, and secondly, what revenue numbers can we forecast? So those are things that influence Treasury. Then Treasury numbers are not intended, you will see down the line, I make the point that we cannot be comfortable with this growth forecast. We need to do more to shape the numbers. And that's the point I'm making in that, which I agree with you, that we should not be comfortable with the 2.1, 1.8 growth levels. Then hence, we need to expand our reform agenda in order to achieve a higher levels of growth. But I must make the point, it's not only growth is influenced by a number of factors. I mean, we may spend more money on infrastructure if in the midstream, while people are in the construction phase, people are going to rock up and demand 30%. You're not going to attract investment. You're not going to make sure that growth is achieved. So I'm raising another aspect of this thing, that our growth is influenced by a number of things, including a crime. So you may go on and on and on. I'm saying there's a totality of issues we need to put together and say all of these things combined are a constraint to growth. So, for instance, electricity, I've mentioned it. For 13 years, even today, you can't guarantee that you'll have electricity for industry, for businesses to operate. So it's a constraint. Part of the difficult then we need to be saying to Minister Mandasha is, we've got to focus our growth, our electricity delivery and supply beyond ESCOM. That's the first bit. The second thing we need to say, we need kind of electricity which can give us massive megawatts. In other words, we should be aiming to generate about 10,000 megawatts. And what kind of technology I'd like to give us that size of electricity, because you need a reserve margin. You don't say we're short of 4,000 as ESCOM is saying, but it does not give you a reserve margin. So that therefore we'll have a load shedding. So we need a capacity that we need to build is one that's going to give us a comfortable reserve margin. So those reforms, I'm just citing electricity as a fund. I mean, in December, I got at 6 a.m. calls from a couple of coal mine executives, because and one asset manager will send me an angry letter and said, "You're losing another 9 billion revenue because we couldn't deliver coal in Richards Bay. Transnet couldn't deliver coal for a variety of reasons, including in infrastructure, which has been cable theft and so on and so on. 15 billion of coal could not be delivered in Richards Bay. So what I'm trying to say, we need to embark on a totality of issues which include crime, cable theft, and electricity supply, bring competition to Transnet Rail. An example, I mean, I've got an angry letter now from Asalomita, because Transnet has reduced this train from Northern Cape from 15 to 8, which is unsustainable. So part of all of those things have got implications for our growth level. If the network industries are inefficient to be able to deliver, they've got implications. So these structural reforms I'm talking about is first a focus on changing the network industry, providing data, and that sort of stuff. But to also make government agile, reduce crime. Yeah.
Kind of on the structure, kind of on the question of the structural reforms, I have a question from Kenneth Creamer, who you would know, Minister is also in our School of Economics and Finance. And Kenneth's questions linked up to the debate we've been having, and his question is, in your view, what do we need to do to lift the growth rate to 4 to 5%?
Come again? Is that Kenneth's question?
Yes. So he'd like to know, what, in your view, do we need to do to lift our growth rate to 4 to 5%?
It's a combination of factors. I don't say, that's why I'm saying what we need to do is in my view, a review. Take, for instance, agriculture. Prof Karan was part of the people who contributed to the chapter of the NDP that we can create 1 million jobs in agriculture. What is it that we need to do to create those 1 million jobs in agriculture, if that's a potential? We need to interrogate that. We need to say, how do we utilize in all these sectors and ensure growth. But you will come down to one thing. First is the regulatory impact. B is the state of our network industries. 3 is crime. Those two to me come up top. That if we handle those issues, the regulatory impact, the crime issues, the network industries being efficient, creating that environment. I can see somebody is making a reference in the chat line to what the president said about the private sector creating jobs. It's a fact. We've got 14 million people employed in South Africa. Only 1.2 are in government, are employed by government. The rest are employed by the private sector. It's a fact. We're not pretending that we're not running a capital or running a socialist society. We're running a capitalist society. So that's a reality. If we don't do that, we'll have what we're facing now, a public sector wage bill, because we want to fund everybody via the state, and which has become unsustainable.
So I'm just going to push this one more time. Minister, I think South Africans have kind of heard the story about kind of structural reforms. We've heard the story about energy. We've heard the story about spectrum, and we don't get a sense that there's a kind of that there's serious capability within government to kind of actually unlock these things and get the economy onto that growth rate that we've discussed. And for me, the concerning part about the budget is that you've laid out a kind of 3-year economic strategy that is saying very similar things, that we've got to solve the crime problem. We have to solve the kind of energy problem. And at the end of that period, I'm still seeing you kind of predicting a growth rate of 1.8%, which leads me to believe that we kind of standing still, and that we're not in a 3-year horizon. You're not seeing the possibility for a substantially improved growth rate. So what are the kind of elements of the strategy that are not in your budget speech that you're hoping will kind of actually change that trajectory so that we can get those growth rates?
I think I made the point earlier on that
we can't hear you. I think you're on mute, Minister.
No, I'm not. You can't hear me now.
I'm still not hearing you.
Is that so? I wonder why. I've tried to unmute.
Okay, it's fine now, Minister. Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah, I made the point earlier on that if you look at the treasury figures are informed by 2 things. The rest is, if everything remains unchanged, these are the growth figures that are likely to happen. And it makes them to sit in a comfortable zone to predict conservative revenue numbers, which says if that's the growth rate we're likely to have, therefore revenue that we're likely to generate is X, right? But my point is, it also says a third element I must add. It's not making an assumption that these reforms will be realized. It makes an assumption that probably these reforms will not realize the outcomes. And therefore, let's assume everything will remain equal, and therefore make those projections. and therefore there's no improved growth. But let me turn to your earlier point of capability. Capability is relative in this, I can say yes and no. There's clear state capacity problem now, which has been undermined largely by the state capture problem. We can't deny that. We can't deny that. That's the first point I want to make. But in any event, no country has got full capacity within the state. What the state does is its capability to attract to employ and buy skills for a specific purpose. Let me just give an example. If we want to build a dam, Umzimvubu Dam, which I've mentioned there, you're not likely to find capability in the state that's going to design and give you the ability to project how much Umzimvubu Dam is going to do for you. So you've got to buy the skill to do that. The question, when you buy that skill, you must have the ability to monitor even the people that you do that. That is capability that has been denuded in the state through the state capture thing. Coupled with that is therefore a corrupt system, which is, it's going to take time to deal with, because this thing has permeated up to the lowest level of government in municipalities. So all these challenges, it's difficult. In the light of these challenges, I understand why Treasury is too conservative and say, we must make for now an assumption that that while we are pursuing these structural reforms, they may not materialize in the next, we'll revise the numbers if we can see that the reforms are coming into fruition. So, but for now, we make an assumption that they may not materialize. Thank you.
So I'm understanding that point then. I think what you're then arguing is that the kind of scenarios on growth are quite pessimistic scenarios, and that you are sort of confident that we're able to get higher rates of growth, and that the numbers can then be amended in the kind of into the future. I want to just take a question from Sibonelo Mtembu, and his question says that there's
I've seen it.
You've seen it.
So yeah, I was.
Minister, I want to congratulate you first for the kind of provision that's been made in the budget for kind of infrastructure development. I think that's a positive area, but I think Sibonelo's question still quite an important one. Would you like to deal with that one?
Yeah, let me just say, I've seen Sibonelo and his caution and carefulness is correct. And he says, look, you yourself, by your own, you are agreeing that out of 257 municipalities, a number of these municipalities are in financial distress. Why do you still entrust them with this delivery? Look, there are a couple of issues. The first, there's a constitutional requirement that I must do so. The Constitution requires a creation of an intergovernmental fiscal relation system. So that is a constitutional requirement. That's the first point. The second point, what has happened over the years is that with the shift of funding towards state-owned enterprises, it has eroded the base of financial base of municipalities and provinces, in particular health and education services. That's the matter we're beginning to address by, in this budget, gradually shifting funds towards municipalities and provinces. If you look at the equitable share ratios, you'll see now the municipalities are beginning to reach double digits. Is deliberate on my part, is to shift that. But there's a third element, which is not only some municipalities have got financial problems, and therefore they're in financial distress, but there's a second element, which relates to capacity in municipalities, which is a matter we're required by Section 154 to provide support to those municipalities that are in such a situation. We are developing mechanisms to assist those municipalities. There's a fourth problem. The fourth problem is corruption. That I'm said it has permeated into a number of levels of government. It's strong in municipalities where there's a fifth and interrelated to the last corruption problem is political interference, right? And now, which we need to attend to. I mean, the case in Mangaung is a combination of both corruption and political interference. It's not something long, just with the new council, it's chaos. So those are some of the things that require political will on our part to challenge and get those things head on. We are not going to resolve those issues by undermining the constitution and not giving them their share of the equitable share as municipalities. We are going to resolve that by confronting the political and the corruption issues head on. That's what my answer I would give to Sponelo. But it's a good challenge what is raising.
So, Minister, I'd like to come back to kind of some of the expenditure issues, but let's just shift gear a bit to tackle some of the text questions. And I've got two from kind of Ashir Radam, who's a lecturer in tax in our School of Accountancy. The one question relates to, let's perhaps start with that one. He points out that there's been adjustments made to the medical kind of credits that are allowed in terms of the deductions, and wonders with the move towards the kind of NHI, is government's thinking in the long term that these kind of subsidies, which are kind of really to high income earners who have medical aid schemes, is your thinking in the long term that those kind of credits are likely to be removed? And what is Treasury's view on that matter?
Look, let me put a Treasury view which I don't share. Let me put a Treasury view which I don't share. Treasury view is that the NHI, you are not likely to realize it in the next 2 to 3 years. Maybe they are correct in the next 2 to 3 years. But for them, you must deal with the existing system as it is. And I do not think there is also an aggressiveness on the part of the Department of Health in terms of NHI. I was asking people, when you say the NHI is expensive, what are these expensive elements in NHI? The majority of the stuff is basically equipment and infrastructure. The question is, why can't we just build it and deal with the modalities later? I think we're likely to come through and discuss, but I can, Treasury guys are very skeptic of the implementation of the NHI in the near future. You won't be surprised when they make these tax concessions. I'm not a skeptic. Yeah.
Okay, he has another question on the tax side, and it's kind of interesting because I haven't seen anyone else speak up on this question. So kind of Ashir points out that in terms of the 2023 kind of assessments that are planned, so your tax assessment form that you would submit, that kind of Treasury is requiring you to declare specified assets and liabilities at market values, which I think is a change. And he sort of wondered whether this is perhaps a sign of a first step towards government introducing a wealth tax. So you might not have the detail about this change in the.
I do.
You do. Okay, let me then allow you to answer the question.
I'm not sure whether I'm allowed to answer that question. I do. I do. I'm not sure whether I'm allowed to answer that question, but for now, there is an intention for people to declare that. It might well be, I'm not saying that's going to be the case, it might well be, it might influence a decision whether to go to the wealth tax or not. I'm familiar, we've discussed that clause extensively.
Great. I won't push you anymore on that one, unless there's something you'd like to say, Minister.
No. All I'm saying, I'm not ruling out the possibility of a wealth tax arising out of this information, but all I'm saying at the moment, we're not there yet.
I'd then like to perhaps come back to some of the expenditure issues, but I was reading a kind of various responses to the budget, and I was quite struck by a comment that Michael Sachs made, which I'm guessing you've seen, and Michael's view is that he feels that the budget that you've tabled is essentially kind of kicking the can down to next year, and that the kind of opportunity that you had with the higher tax avenues have not been used as well as you might have, and that you've effectively kicked all of the complicated questions down to the budget for next year. Do you have a response to that?
I think I should respond to that question together to the question by Neil Coleman.
Sure.
I think they are related. They are related because Neil is asking whether it's also because by avoiding. Let me just say, start with Neil Coleman's point. There's a lot of these grants that we provide where there's extended public works program, public employment program, the SRD, the community development workers, the ETI, and a whole range of these taxes or incentives. What we tend to do is to simply demand a new one on top of these. without evaluating the efficacy of this. His question then is that a possibility of introducing a universal basic income grant. I don't want to call it a universal income grant. I do believe that we need an optimal income support of some kind. We can't avoid that question moving forward. But my own philosophy on this stuff is that, you know, I had a debate 2 weeks ago with Ricardo Hausman, and his argument is convincing. His argument is, you guys are not focusing on inclusive growth. And as a result, you are spending more money in compensating people for excluding them, which I think is a profound argument. So my focus is there a scope of doing a combination of two things? Again, it's not a policy thing, it's a thing, I'm just thinking aloud. I'm just thinking aloud. You know, I've got a relative in Soweto, my nephew, who has gone through TVET up to N6, high voltage NOHA electricity. But what he needs is unemployed. But what he needs is one minor thing, is to get through practical work and write a trade certificate. Now, so I'm arguing for a couple of interventions. The first one intervention is where we transition people into productive activity. It may be more expensive than what we're talking about. Maybe that we should pay for that because it's an investment. Maybe we should pay for that because it's an investment. Transition people into this productive activity and have skills. If my nephew could have a trade certificate, he may not be employed, but he can come in and solve and get your electricity sorted in your house and get some income. In all probability today, if anybody comes into your house and is an African and is an electrician, in all probability it's from Zimbabwe. So I'm arguing a two-pronged approach, Neil, which says that there will be people who there's nothing else we can do. And in my view, which then we need to focus on some income support of a different nature. Again, this is my view, it's not a view of government or the ANC. But I think let's be open to these debates and not be fixated to any specific direction. If Neil says I've kicked the can, it may well be because I've not done Michael Sachs. It may well be because I myself have not perfected my thinking on these issues, as I've said. We have agreed, this government position, that we extend the SRT grant to next year, March. But we have not said, how are we going to deal with the challenges that was confronting us beyond March next year? So we need to sharpen our thinking. I agree that those big issues like that we've not attended to this time. And also precisely because there's a view that the revenues that we have are of a temporal nature, and therefore you are not likely to fund permanent programs with temporal revenues. So all of this stuff we need to refine during the course of the year so that when we get into March next year, we have got a clearer view of how we're going to deal with these big questions. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Minister, if I could just push that sort of argument a little bit. So I think a fair kind of criticism of the budget might be that what we're trying to do is to do everything. So you're putting some money into kind of increasing the social wage and keeping the SRD grant going. You're putting some money into the small business area. You're putting some money into solving the kind of student financial aid scheme kind of problems, and that you kind of grappling with this tension between the kind of crisis in the immediate moment that you have to deal with a more long-term investment strategy that might pay off in a few years. And in some ways, that's a time inconsistency problem that you're dealing with. There's these immediate pressures, but you're trying to kind of steer the kind of economy along a particular path. And that by kind of spreading all of these resources in a way where there's a bit of this and a bit of that, but there's no courageous step that is being made to say, we are taking this particular path, we've made the decision, and here's the payoff that we see coming in 5 years' time. And you open with South Africans and say, it's either going to be painful on these things, but it seems to me you've spread it out all over the place. In some ways, you've got lots of good comments for that, because you've got you've not made anyone extremely unhappy, but neither have you taken a kind of decisive path. And you're saying to us, well, we'll sort all of these things out in 1 year's time. Why would we have any confidence in the kind of economic ministry's ability to take us onto that path?
The challenges you are dealing with are not going to disappear. First, you've got a challenge of the coronavirus pandemic. I'm not sure whether by next day it will have disappeared. So the fight to save lives, you can't avoid it. You have got an economy which has been declining over a decade. It's a challenge that is on the table. You have got to spend some resources, put some resources in trying to find a way. How do you change that trajectory? In the meantime, you've got poverty as a result of this massive unemployment. You can't close your eyes to that. So you are spreading this thing not because you have got a choice, but the objective conditions confronting you necessitate that. Now, it's all very well for somebody to say, no, forget about anything, just tax everybody else and get basic income grant. The other things will sort themselves. It doesn't work that way in a government environment. In a government environment, you've got to look at the broader and all these challenges and say, how do I deal with them at the same time, but in a manner which is sustainable.
Thank you, Minister. I want to pick up on the question from Sidelo. And I think it's kind of interesting because I think I would agree with the kind of argument that the kind of transition to a kind of green economy has potential to put South Africa onto a kind of growth trajectory that is quite different to the one that we're on. I also think if we don't handle that kind of transition in the way that we should, that I think we could face some quite severe headwinds down the line. So Anga's question's asking you about what are our government's plans to tax kind of green and kind of clean energy, and is there any kind of thinking to move the dial to start to kind of decrease, for example, the levies on kind of electric vehicles, which some of them are kind of disincentivizing the kind of shift to green and kind of clean technologies. I think there's some irony in the fact that most countries give you a tax credit for buying a kind of electric vehicle. In South Africa, you have to pay a kind of additional levy on that, as far as I kind of understand it. So these are more long-term things, and I sort of wondered if you had any thoughts on that.
Let me just say, I mean, the electric cars for consumption in South Africa, in the absence of electricity and load shedding, I'm not sure whether we're talking on a practical, we're being practical and objective. My colleague Ibrahim Patel has got excitement with electric cars. Not for the domestic market, by the way. Not for the domestic work. He wants us to manufacture them, not for the domestic market, but for export. Because we can't buy cars on a massive scale with load shedding and so on in South Africa, no ways. So are we thinking about incentivizing the production of electric cars? There is a discussion. That's why I'm using this argument debate between ourselves and Minister Patel, largely for export, so that we should not lose the capability long-term of being a player in that market. So we are having a discussion in that regard. The second set of questions is a transition towards is what is called a just transition. The problem with that debate is muddied even in government by two extremes. Right? By two extremes. And one extreme is an extreme which is resistant to any change status quo. The other extreme is one that says, no. Green technology and renewables are your solution tomorrow. The objective reality is that more than 90% of our electricity generated from coal. And that trajectory is not likely to change over the next 10 years. The question is, how do we position ourselves for this long-term transition so that by the year 2050, we're in a better position? That's the first, a longer-term trajectory. There's no conversation if like that. It'd be useful that we have, I've not seen it even documents produced outside government, which says this position, if we're to do A, Y, X, and Y, these are the numbers for growth and employment. Maybe I'm the only one, I've not seen data even outside government on that. So the starting point, in my view, is to accept that if we're not moving, even the developed world is going to use that as a non-trade barrier. In other words, you are not likely to sell your products, whether steel or anything else, because the developed world is likely to use that as a non-trade barrier. So we've got to begin to say, how do we position ourselves now in such a manner that we avoid those punitive measures in now, but by 2050, we can claim to be like all zero emissions. But because of these two extremes, which have got ready-made answers, you make this debate a difficult one of saying how to position ourselves in this transition. The unfortunate part, I'm not sure whether I've seen anything even outside government which is helpful in crunching numbers. So, okay, from where you sit, from an employment perspective, if you close Komat power station, you are also closing massive people who are in employment, but also a mine that supplies them. In terms of jobs, it's massive. So you may say we'll replace those jobs, but how are we going to replace them? So what is thinking? So my sense is that instead of all of us, I'm more than happy to be engaging even with people outside government on this issue, because I don't think we're doing it in a helpful way in government, in a strategic discussion.
Right.
But we have imposed carbon taxes and that, but it's not linked to a broader strategic for the transition.
Right. I'm kind of sure there'll be quite a few in the room who would be happy to take you up on that offer. And it's time to move on to the retirement issue, and there's a kind of question from Nolutando in Gwenya about the kind of proposed two-pot kind of retirement savings kind of issue. And I know that this is a kind of demand that has come strongly from the trade unions, that their members be allowed to kind of access their retirement savings before retirement. And I think her concern is, what do you think the impact of this is going to be on savings in a country that sort of where kind of household savings is already quite low? Are you concerned about this concession, or do you see it as a positive development?
No, it's not. It's not a positive development. It's not a positive development. I was involved in the early 80s in people to try to demand two things: their retirements that they must be paid back, and second, to transfer them where, in certain circumstances, from pension to provident funds. Sitting here, it was painful in the early 90s to see workers in Mercedes living work without any pension at all. So I'm taking from practical experience. So there are challenges with that decision. Now, so we are dealing with two issues. We're dealing with long-term and short-term. What is the short-term one? The short-term one, precisely because of this demand, we're saying we're going to make provision in legislation where each provident or pension fund can allow employees to withdraw a portion of their savings. Now, that's a temporary measure once off, but that decision must be taken by the trustees on the basis of the soundness of the fund. It can't be taken by the Minister of Finance. The trustees of the fund, based on actuarial evaluation of the fund and its soundness, must make that decision. That's the short-term one. The long-term one is a two-pot system where in order to deal with this challenge we're facing now, the two-pot system says in the long term, then you will have two kinds of savings. One which is going to come into in the form of annuity and so on. And the one where you can immediate as a saving component, which we can withdraw in order to deal with this challenge we're facing now moving forward. So that's basically how we're entering the debate at the moment.
So let's shift on, Minister, to one of the more controversial areas in your budget, and I'm sure you've had to deal with this question a lot in the last 24 hours, and that is the kind of expenditure plans for public sector pay, and the kind of the kind of provision in the budget for no real increase in the total expenditure of government on public sector employment. I think you've been accused of of this area being a sign that this is a budget of austerity. The kind of unions are kind of clearly upset about this, but it does seem to me you've also tackled head on some of the more kind of challenging questions that we have to deal with about public sector reform. Would you like to share with us some of your kind of thinking behind the budget numbers and how you see this playing out in the next while?
Okay, let me say, part of the challenge is the following. The bargaining calendar itself is a mess. You table the budget in February, but you start the negotiations in March. After you've tabled the budget. That on its own, it lends itself to you being accused of undermining the bargaining process by attaching a number. So, whereas it's not your fault, it's the fault of the bargaining calendar itself, which is a problem. Last year, the agreement was that if we don't find agreement in the next financial year, there's an agreed package which we'll implement if there's no agreement. What we have budgeted for is that agreed package if there's no agreement. Now, it's not trying to undermine the bargaining process at all. We have said the agreement says if there's no agreement in next year, we will have to pay 20 billion rand, and we've put that 20 billion rand on the table as part of the agreement. Is not to undermine the bargaining process. So if I clarify that, we've got a meeting coming up on the 28th to the 31st of March, which is a summit, not negotiations, between government and the public sector unions. We'll test these issues out there. May I, before going and deal with Khobra's question of the Have we made any assumptions about the unfolding events in Ukraine? The answer is no. The answer is no. The second question, corruption, are we looking at it with procurement lens, true government procurement lenses, specifically as related to SOEs? We were going to table a procurement bill which is replaces whatever procurement procedures and laws exist. We have postponed that for two reasons. The first one is the Zondo Commission report. The first report deals extensively with procurement. We want to look at the legal implications of that. The second reason, we've just lost a court case in the Constitutional Court. We want to study the implications of that court and begin to say, in the light of that, what kind of procurement bill we should be placing in place, taking into account the effects of those two developments. Let me pause there.
Right. Well, there's one more. Since you're kind of at a university, I thought we could also just explore with you the kind of question of the funding to NSFAS, and if I could push that with you a little bit. So this seems to me to be a problem that is quite characteristic of the way we do something, that we do things in South Africa. So quite clearly, we've kind of ended up in the situation because of a political decision that was made on to take us on a path which I think many commentators were concerned about the kind of economic sustainability of the kind of agreements that were reached after the fees must fall movement. And we now sit with a problem where the demands on NSFAS continue to grow, and they will continue to grow. My kind of reading of the budget review is that National Treasury's made a contribution to solving that problem, but it hasn't actually put in enough to actually solve the problem, and that it will require certain kind of readjustments in the budget of the Department of Higher Education to kind of address the problem. So we put in additional resources, but this kind of problem, my view would be, this problem isn't going to go away. It's going to get worse. What is your kind of thinking on this issue?
Look, it's an issue which really I'm new to it. We've had a meeting with the Minister of Higher Education, and he has done some reviews which need to be looked into, set up some committees which did some reviews. We need to delve into those reviews moving forward. But how we characterize the problem was that for now, the funding is for those whose parents have got a combined income of 350 and downwards. There's an argument that there's a missing gap, which is between that 350 and 600. In the discussion we had with the minister was that, oh, of course, those people there's another way of a funding mechanism. We can talk to the banks to guarantee any of those people to get a loan from the banks. and we will guarantee that. That's my last discussion with them on this issue.
Great. Minister, you've had a long day.
This is subject to a long-term discussion about the best funding model.
You've had a long day, and you've kind of generously given us your time. So, Minister, we should release you to get some rest. But I want to give you the final, the kind of final word for you to share with us any thoughts about the future economic trajectory of South Africa.
Come again?
I want to kind of give you the opportunity to share any thoughts that you would like to share with us about kind of how we solve our economic problems and how this budget fits in with that.
Look, the budget on its own, the budget on its own cannot be the final instrument for growth, because it facilitates certain levers, not everything. Hence, the critical discussion about what the president has introduced, a compact, is important. In other words, what we need to do is to mobilize all stakeholders around a common vision. What is that common vision? Is that we need to build an inclusive society and inclusive economy. What are the elements of that is something which must emerge as part of that social compact. What we would appreciate with dealing with the academic community is what would be your contribution in helping us to think these issues through? That's the challenge in answering this your question. I'm throwing the challenge back to you and say, from where I sit, I'm available for an engagement with the academic community on what are the best practical solutions that we need to confront as a nation to solve these problems. And that's my challenge. I say we don't have answers merely as government. I can tell you that. But thank you for inviting me and sharing these ideas. They themselves also help to shape our thinking. If you've done this kind of questions and feedback, they help to shape our thinking, and I appreciate
it. Right. Thank you so much, Minister. From kind of our side, let me thank you for your time, and kind of also thank you for the openness and the candid approach that you've taken, both to the conversation we've had today, but to the kind of general functioning of the ministry. I think we all value your openness, your kind of frankness, and your kind of enthusiasm for engaging us all. Thank you so much. I hope you get some rest, and I will certainly take up your offer for further engagement with the university community.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone else, for joining us. And I think with those words, let's then kind of close the evening. I wish you all a kind of pleasant evening, and let's all get to do the work that needs to be done to make this economy one that is growing and one that is delivering equality for all. Thank you and good night.
Good night.